Welcome back, Honors. Yeah, that's right. Flip on the weekend. Finally have a Sunday off to get some stuff knocked out. Not at a wedding or in North Carolina, so let's get after it, all right? We're going to wrap up Absolutism today, talking about a couple of really cool characters from Russia. We are going to get after it tomorrow with a scientific revolution. We won't have a warm-up at all tomorrow because I love talking about this stuff that much, all right? So, getting into it, though. During the late 1500s, we already talked a little bit about this, but let's rehash it from Friday, right? During the late 1500s, Russia was still so large that it clung to its feudal system. So these landowners called boyars actually controlled all of these huge swaths of land, and the serfs and the peasants actually lived and worked on it with it, or lived and worked on it. So Ivan the Fourth is going to be the very first person, also known as the Terrible, to unite the different boyars together and to consolidate the nobles under one government, right? He does this by doing a lot of different things. He gives them a flat tax rate, but he also does this by stripping power from them as well, forcing them to actually proclaim his dominance and a professional army as the leadership of Russia, right? So he centralizes his government and he names himself the Tsar, right? The Caesar, if you will. And remember I told you his coronation ceremony, he was showered with gold coins and did a lot of insanely cool stuff. So anyway, not actually insanely cool, very, very screwed up. We talked about him a little bit on Friday, talked about how he was a pretty normal ruler for the most part up until the death of his wife, where he started to really, really portray symptoms of bipolar disorder. One famous story about him right here, you see in the background the St. Basil's Cathedral. We looked at a picture of St. Basil's on Friday. So one fun story that apparently goes along with St. Basil's, even though it probably didn't happen, but we like to believe that it did, Mr. Fisher, you'll really like this story, is that St. Basil's was so beautiful that following the death of his wife, Ivan the Terrible asked one of the chief architects, he's like, could you ever build this building or one like it ever again? Because I don't know if I want one ever built like this. It's this nice ever again. And the architect said, well, I think I could build it as long as I have my eyes. Ivan the Terrible then had his eyes burnt out, all right? So, like, he did a lot of different things like that. Destroyed Cossack villages, which are these rural land-working people on the outskirts of, like, the former Mongolian Empire, right? Destroyed many, many noble families who refused to actually dignify him as the Tsar. Killed a lot of people. Very, very aggressive. Another crazy story about him, though, we're going to get to is following his stripping of the power of the boyars, he created the very first absolute government in Russia, right? And he rules from his central location in Moscow. Now, his dynasty is going to die out in 1613 because one of his heirs never had any male sons. And it's going to pass for the first time to a new family in 1613 to Mikhail Romanov, all right? And the Romanov family, write this down like right about here, is going to rule over Russia for, anybody want to take a guess? Good job, Madison Marks, for 300 years. The Romanovs rule successfully for 300 years. They're related to all that creepy hooking up with your cousins kind of stuff of the Habsburgs and Queen Victoria's line in England. Like, actually, Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, was actually a cousin of Victoria's. So, anyway, getting after it, though, let's talk about why Ivan the Terrible's dynasty died out. It has to do with one famous story. Now, parts and the details may be a little exaggerated, but I like to believe that they're not because it's a really cool story. Ivan IV, pictured here, with his son, okay? I can never remember what the son's name is. Hold on one second. Ivan IV, sons. Here we go. It's Fedor. All right. Ivan Ivanovich. Anyway, in his arms right there is his son, Fedor, right? So he has 3 surviving children from his first wife, his great love, right? He has Fedor, he's got his daughter, and then he's got his son, Ivan Ivanovich, all right? Anyway, Ivan's son of Ivan, right? So Ivan, though, Ivanovich, let's talk about their family. Now, Fedor is very, very prominent, well-known around Moscow, very smart, very intelligent. Everyone's excited to see him become the next leader of their great country. Then you got the daughter. The daughter is being courted by several noblemen, a lot of different boyars. Ivan, though, is not really too happy, with her actually courting these noblemen due to the fact that one of these noblemen, should something happen to Fedor, could possibly try to take the throne, right? So he's not happy about that even a little bit. Now, and then Ivan Ivanovich, his third youngest child and second son, is mentally handicapped. We're not really sure with what, but we believe it's some type of autism, possibly Down syndrome. Now, Ivan Ivanovich obviously is not fit to rule, right? So they're all the one big happy family. Fedor arrives at supper one evening with the daughter, which I can never remember her name either, and Ivan the Fifth, or well, excuse me, I don't want to say the fifth yet, right? So anyway, Ivan Ivanovich. So they arrive at supper, and the daughter, word on the street, as Fedor knows because she went to Fedor to talk to him about it, is pregnant with the son of a nobleman. All right, so well, possibly not a son, we don't really know, but she's pregnant, and due to this, her body began to react to the pregnancy. Okay, her breast began to get larger. She started to show a slight amount, but she would wear a corset to actually put that down. But she was wearing a dress, and due to the development of her body during the pregnancy, Ivan the Terrible believed that she was showing off too much and was being indecent. So at supper one evening, when he looked over at her and believed that she was showing off too much, he beat her. He beat her so badly she had a miscarriage. So Fedor then reacts to this, finds out about the miscarriage, and goes to confront his father, Ivan the Terrible. And he yells at him, and he confronts him in the throne room. And Ivan is sitting on his throne with his scepter in his, I don't think he has his crown on. He has his scepter in his hand that he uses as a cane. Now, the scepter is about 5 feet long. It's got a pointed end at the end of it. And he's sitting there, and Fedor's yelling at him. Fedor's yelling, he's like, how could you do this? How could you do that to her? She was pregnant, nah. Ivan calmly then stands up, looked at his scepter, looked at his son, and then jams it into the side of his head and kills Fedor. Immediately after killing him, right here as this painting depicts, he collapsed to his knees and began to weep. This is one of those instances where we believe that he had bipolar disorder because of his immediate polar reactions to the situation. Now, Ivan the Terrible is going to die. His daughter never marries, so left in line to rule is poor Ivan Ivanovich, Ivan the Fifth, right? He was mentally handicapped, never produced any heirs, and then so the throne passes to the Romanov family, right? The Russian government becomes an absolute state for hundreds of years. And then this Romanov comes in to change how the landscape is seen. This guy, all 6 foot 8 inches of him, is Peter the Great, right? So let's talk about Peter really quick. I wish we had time to talk about Catherine the Great because she's a really cool figure in history. But in the Western Civ guidelines, we just don't really have that much time. So anyway, we got Ivan the Fourth right here, right? Extremely Russian. Wearing cold weather outfits, beard, very unkempt looking in a way, right? All kinds of Russian. What's different about him and Peter the Great? Good job, Susie, I heard you. Just a mustache, right? Anybody? Good job, Sean Martin, I heard you. Very Western-style clothing, right? Anybody? Good job, Adam Marini, right? Standing in front of more modern weapons. The map right there signifies the ideas of intelligence and Westernization, right? Well, all this has to do with the fact of Peter's great grand tour, right? So write down grand tour somewhere. It's where he took a journey to the West and in an attempt to modernize Russia. Him and all of his ambassadors began to tour through the entire West, which, let's look up what year that is just to be safe, because I don't want to say the wrong one. Peter the Great Grand Tour. From 1697 to 1698. I was almost 100% confident in that. I just didn't want to say it wrong. So anyway, so from 1697 to 1698, he begins to tour throughout these different areas. He sees the enclosure system in England. He sees the putting out system. He sees capitalistic governments, mercantilistic governments. He begins to expose himself to the modernized era of the Western European state. And so he does a lot of different things. He begins to develop a Russian navy. He begins to develop trade lines so he can actually create a transatlantic marketplace of his own. He begins to make Russia an important European state. He grows the military exponentially to a standing army of 210,000, right? creates a professional army. He follows the lines of the great Western European families like the Hohenzollerns and the Bourbons and the Stuarts, and begins to create the modern Western version of Russia. This is why we view Russia as a Western civilization, is due to Peter the Great and his attempts to create the Western Russian state, right? So he also brought around great cultural changes. He wrote a book on Russian manners that actually were emblematic of French. Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. The diplomatic language at the time was French because France was the most dominantly powerful and as well wealthy country in the world. It's about 100 years before their revolution. They were extremely dominant, very, very wealthy, and if you went to any diplomatic meeting, everyone spoke French, right? So he forced all men to share, if you were a nobleman, a boyar, and you wanted to discuss anything diplomatic with Peter the Great, you had to speak to him in French, right? So he adopted that big policy, wrote a book of Russian manners. Men had to shave their beards or they would be issued citations if they were walking throughout Moscow with a beard, because Westerners wore mustaches instead. It was the popular trend at the time. And then also brought more rights to women. He made it actually so women didn't have to veil themselves when they came into public, right? So Peter the Great was a very, very influential leader, okay? He actually created the modern Russian state. So much so that he created a new capital, and he called it St. Petersburg. It was known as the window to the west, right? Vienna is known as the window to the east. St. Petersburg, the window to the west. You see how that works, right? So the Russian capital until 1918 was St. Petersburg, right? It was a port city way, way far up towards towards Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And he actually created a modern European city, full on with beautiful buildings, all kinds of different like waterways, transatlantic systems, canals for shipping lanes. Like that looks like almost Paris in a way, right? The wide streets, the great grandioseness of any European city. If any of you have ever been to a European city, this looks much more like a European city than Moscow did at the time. And then also he had his version of Versailles built, the Winter Palace. It's on my bucket list. I gotta see it. You know what I mean? Now, the Winter Palace is steeped in Baroque architecture. It is beautiful in its colors. I encourage you to go look it up. It's amazing. But that's where we're going to stop for today, and that's going to wrap up absolutism and the trend of absolutism in Europe, right? So, good job, guys. Very impressed. You guys are studs. Test on Wednesday. I will see you then, all right? So, have a great rest of your weekend. Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.